for everybody this August. If we were down at the library, normally would take this time to introduce all the members of the Chesterfield Township Executive Committee who helped put on tonight's event. But to keep the technology simple, we're going to skip that with all of the members. My name is Mike Keene. I am one of the co-chairs. Maureen Jordan is the other co-chair, and she is helping back me up tonight. So if we have any issues, she will come to my aid and rescue. I have no doubt about that. She is also our timekeeper for tonight's event. We want to get to tonight's event quickly, and so I'm just going to quickly go over the rules for tonight's event, and then we will get on with the candidate introductions. Each of the candidates will have 7 to 8 minutes to give us their opening statement. Once that is completed, we will go to the question and answer session. We have quite a few questions that have already been submitted, but if you do have a question, please use the question and answer box to send those to us. We will be monitoring the Q&A section as we go through tonight's event. During the question and answer session, each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer that particular question. Should they happen to mention another candidate in their response, that candidate will then get 1 minute to respond to the answer. Approximately 7:45 p.m. tonight, we will be wrapping up the question and answer sessions, and we will have a closing remarks time where each candidate will have 2 minutes to go through their closing statements for tonight's everyone's benefit. Speaking. So, the order of participants tonight, we will start with Mark Mantovani, then go to Dr. Sam Page, then to Jamie Tolliver, and then to Jake Zimmerman. This was strictly done in alphabetical order. It has no reflection for anything else other than the happen chance of how they were named. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Mantovani for his opening remarks.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity to address some new friends and some familiar faces from a couple of years ago. Just a word or two about myself, for those of you who are not familiar with me. Many of you know that St. Louis has been my home for most of my life. My wife, Patty, and I both grew up in St. Louis County. She in Rock Hill, me in Afton. We've been married for just under 43 years. We have 3 children, 10 grandchildren, all whom reside in St. Louis County. With respect to my professional life, I have been, I like to say I've had a nonlinear, which sounds better than saying I've had a checkered past. I have been a lawyer, a teacher, a coach, a CEO, an entrepreneur. I've served on countless boards and committees, civic, charitable, regional, within the St. Louis metropolitan area. I have had the opportunity to spend a year in committed study to state and local governance as a member of the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative. Having left my business career a number of years ago, I dedicated myself to trying to provide some service to my community. Many of you have heard me say that over the course of my lifetime, our community has been on a rather unfortunate trajectory across a wide variety of different variables. Our population base has declined. Our economic base is stagnant. We have excessive rates of poverty. Our rate of economic mobility, the rate at which people move out of poverty, is low. We have very high rates of violent crime. Our educational outcomes are substandard. And all of these things, I believe, are within the purview in one way, shape, or form of St. Louis County Executive. I have come to believe that the Office of St. Louis County Executive over these past years has been underutilized. It has not been utilized in an aggressive way to provide solutions to this myriad of challenges. And the consequences of that are that our community fails to achieve its potential, and it continues to be passed up as we tread water with other communities who are swimming at a higher rate of speed. I think that's unfortunate, and I think it is attributable in large measure to the quality of our leadership. In many respects, the people of St. Louis County are no different than the people of Nashville or Kansas City or Indianapolis. Our leadership, however, has failed to provide this kinds of positive momentum that we're seeing in other places around the country, around the Midwest specifically. So as a consequence of that, I have offered my service to try to get this community moving again. I think our fundamental challenge involves creating a more economic growth. Absent creating economic growth, we have limited resources to address the many complicated and real social challenges that our community has. The fact is that if we cannot achieve a higher level of economic growth, the social challenges associated with poverty and the lack of economic mobility and the like won't be, the resources won't be there to provide effective solutions. To assume that in a stagnant economy, one group is going to prosper while other groups are not, I think makes it very difficult. We create winners and losers in this community all the time. My belief is that we have to grow this economic engine in order to provide more opportunity for everybody. So that's the fundamental issue that I hope to talk about later this evening. I believe that the community has potential if we have effective leadership, and I'm very committed and very passionate about the potential of our community.
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Sam Page.
Thank you. I'm Sam Page. I grew up in a single-parent household in a small town in southern Missouri. My mom was a public school teacher, and we didn't have much. But from the time I was about 9 years old, I worked alongside my grandfather in the forest, cleaning brush as he cut timber. I think he paid me about $1 a day. But the value of what he taught me was priceless, and what my mother taught me too, the value of hard work. Whether I was in the back of the sawmill or cutting grass in yards across town or studying. And that work ethic got me to UMKC on a full scholarship, where I stayed on for medical school and met my beautiful wife, Jenny. We have 3 handsome boys that I'm very proud of. We have 3 backyard chickens that I've appreciated a lot in the past few months. And of course, we have our rescue dog, Midnight. I went to medical school to help people, and it's the same reason I went into public service. I started out as a city councilman in Creve Coeur, then became a state representative, then a county councilman, where I helped to uncover corruption in the prior administration, and now I'm proud to serve as your county executive. Having both a medical degree and experience in municipal, county, and state government has all been an enormous asset over the past 6 months. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken most of my attention over these months, but my first priority has been in keeping you all safe. And that's why St. Louis County issued stay-at-home orders earlier than almost everywhere else in the country. And we base every decision based on data and the opinions of experts. We are slowly reopening, and we are watching the results to make sure that this is the right course of action, and I'm happy to talk more about how that is going later tonight. I am doing press briefings at 8:30 a.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays on my county executive Facebook page and live via local media outlets. We have testing centers in all corners of the county, and we've created stlcorona.com to give daily updates and provide resources, including the transparency portal, where you can see where every dollar of the federal funds are being spent. Now, some communities have been hit harder than others, and Black people are contracting the virus and dying from the virus at higher rates than white people. And racism is a public health crisis. Black communities have historically not gotten the resources they need, and addressing this disparity has been at the center of our COVID response, as it has been at the center of so many of our policy decisions. Black Lives Matter. And in our administration, equity isn't a catchphrase. It's a bedrock principle, and that's reflected in what I've done so far and in our plans for the future. And that's why we've worked with Professor Jason Purnell to make sure that the funding we have from federal grants goes to where it's needed the most. We've dedicated $2.6 million to food security, $10 million to rental, mortgage, and utility help, and homelessness prevention, all to keep families safe and at home. And that's why we've worked with the Clergy Coalition to distribute 100,000 masks to faith communities and dedicated $5.9 million to child care relief programs for our child care providers, and distributed over 600,000 masks to our community. We look out for our most vulnerable, and our innovative strategy to helping our nursing homes has been so effective that it is now being used as a national example for others to follow. My office has released an annual report that goes over all the progress we have made in the year since I became county executive, including raising the minimum wage in county jobs to $15 an hour, expanding paid sick leave and family leave, and helping families stay in their homes through an affordable housing trust fund. We've implemented prevailing wage and implemented anti-bias training for police officers from the first years to the top brass. There's a lot more, and you can read about it in the annual report. But the bottom line is I'm committed to building a St. Louis County that is healthier, safer, and more equitable, and my record of county executive demonstrates just that. I've been endorsed by labor, including the umbrella organizations of the Building Trades and the Labor Council, which represents more than 20 individual unions and clubs, as well as the St. Louis Young Democrats, Action 314, St. Louis Indivisible, the Sierra Club, and Planned Parenthood. And the full list can be found on my webpage at sampage.com. I believe leaders build coalitions to get things done, and my endorsement list shows that I'm able to do just that. I'm looking forward to taking your questions, and I'm grateful for your time and your efforts to improve St. Louis County. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, Jamie Tolliver, would you like to make your opening statement, please?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me once again. I'm happy to be here. I know that a lot of you all may not know very much about me. I am definitely very new to the political scene. I was born and raised in St. Louis. I lived here the majority of my life until about 2001, when I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and I left and I came back about 4 or 5 years ago with my 2 small children. I am now a single mother living in University City. I attended Clark Atlanta University while in Atlanta, Georgia. There I also received my master's, both of which I received high marks. I graduated with honors with both. I graduated with my bachelor's in business administration, management, and marketing. My master's and my soon-to-be doctorate are both in education. And I received an associate's also in early childhood education. I later moved to New York for a few years, where I took part in a nonprofit organization as part of their leadership staff. And also I've done numerous things with my church. I am a preacher's child. And so I've been in community service pretty much my entire life. But a lot of what it is that I do, what I stand for, it is rooted heavily in education and communications. I do believe that here in St. Louis County, that there are a lot of good things that are happening, but I definitely think there are a lot of things that could be done better, because I believe that in very many ways, there are lots of segments of our county that are not spoken for, that are not regarded, or that are not taken care of to the same degrees. I don't actually have the support of the major companies, but I also think that puts me in a position where I'm able to speak from my heart. I am able to speak to the community and speak for the community in ways that others may not be able to, simply because I do not owe anybody any favors. I do definitely believe that there are things that need to be done in the areas of healthcare, education, social justice, and that's to include the police department in St. Louis County. I believe that St. Louis County should be an example to many other areas of Missouri, but as Missouri continues to decline in very many areas because of things such as its criminal rate, its poor education, and its lack of care and concern for the energy bill as it faces the citizens and those who fall under the purview of the leadership. I definitely believe that there are ways in which we can operate better. I do believe that there are ways in which we can partnership with various other cities, both the St. Louis city, and that doesn't mean merger, but it definitely does mean partnership. I definitely believe that there are ways for us to take example from cities and states that are doing things well, like Kansas City in some areas, or Nashville in some areas. I definitely think that communication and education are the deepest things that St. Louis County seems to lack. And I believe that I am the county executive that would put that into place. There are definitely more things that are in my platform. If you want to go to jamietolliverforexec.org, you're able to see more. I look forward to answering any questions that you all have this evening. Again, my platform is Together We Win, and that is not just a slogan, that is absolutely a call to action. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and now to Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you very much. I'm Jake Zimmerman. I'm honored to serve you as your county assessor, and I'm really honored to be before you this evening seeking your vote on August 4th. Look, you know me. You know my long history as a staunch progressive Democrat. You know that I have never wavered when it comes to defending a woman's right to choose, when it comes to standing up for equality, when it comes to having the guts to stand up for marriage equality when others did not, when it comes to fighting for our progressive values and standing up against the despicable behavior of the Republican leadership in Jefferson City. Because of that, I will spare you the recitation of my resume and my quality time in the legislature, because I have a voting record, as does one of my opponents, and you can judge us on it. And I have a history of Democratic activism and of not playing footsie with Republicans, and you can judge us on that. And so because of that, rather than recite my record, which I think many of you know well, let's cut to the chase. And let's talk about the double-barreled crisis that we find ourselves in St. Louis County. Let's talk about the fact that St. Louis County has a police chief newly appointed by current leadership who says with a straight face that there's no such thing as a racism problem in the St. Louis County Police Department. Folks, this is not okay. This is unacceptable. This is not a time to go for more studies. This is not a time to seek corporate dark money. This is not a time to hem and haw. This is not a time to say on the one hand, but on the other hand. This is time for leadership that says that that is not acceptable. And that is why I have proposed a plan for real police reform and accountability that goes beyond the 8 can't wait proposals, which need to be adopted not just in St. Louis County, but throughout this region yesterday. And take care of the simple reality that until we confront this square in the face, until we say that this doesn't just happen in Minneapolis, and it doesn't just happen in Atlanta, and it doesn't just happen in New York, then we will never get past the moment we are in. Because let's also say this, and I say this advisedly because I'm looking at the list of names on this Zoom call, and I've spoken to a few meetings of the Chesterfield Township Democratic Club in my day, and I know what the faces look like, right? And the vast majority of the faces and the vast majority of the faces on this Zoom look like mine. And particularly in a situation like this, where 3 of the 4 people standing before you are middle-aged white men, let's say this, let's say it directly. Where people are dying from this virus is not predominantly within the boundaries of the Chesterfield Township Democratic Club. People of color, people who live north of that Delmar Divide are 4 times as likely to get the disease and 4 times as likely to die of it. And yet, under current leadership, it was possible to get a COVID-19 test in Chesterfield well over a month before there was a single testing site open and available north of that Delmar line. And so I say to you, I call upon you, and particularly those of you who live within spitting distance of the Chesterfield Township, stand up and say that's not okay. Stand up and say we must do better. And stand up and say that if we keep going with the status quo, we will keep getting status quo results. And that means we will keep getting the same old St. Louis. It is time for us to confront these two crises, the crises of systematic and institutional racism and the crisis of a virus that does indeed discriminate, straight in the face. We can no longer be the kind of St. Louisans who tolerate bickering among our leaders, who tolerate leaders who refuse to check egos at the door, who tolerate leadership that squabbles with one another over who pays for 18 cops on the Metrolink, or whether we have money for contact tracing and you don't. The virus doesn't care which side of a municipal line you live on. If contact tracing fails in one place, it fails everywhere. So folks, you have a stark choice in the race before you. If what you want is a real Democrat, if what you want is someone who shares your values, if what you want is someone who has spent his life committed to fighting for progressive reform, if what you want is anything other than more of the same, then I'm Jake Zimmerman, and I'd be honored to earn your support in this election. Thank you.
And thank you. All right. We're ready to move on to the question and answer session tonight. And again, for technology simplicity, we will just go in the same order that the opening statements were made. Each candidate will again have 2 minutes to give their response to the question. And should they mention another candidate in their response, that candidate will have a 1 minute time slot to respond. So looking at the questions that came in advance here, what reforms do you feel are needed for St. Louis County Police, and how would you help achieve these reforms? So again, we'll start with Mark Mantovani.
Look, the fact is that policing is changing all over the country where people are enlightened. The best policing is the smartest policing. Many of you know that I was endorsed by the St. Louis County Police Association. On the evening that they called me to come to their office to give me that endorsement, which was a date before the murder in Minneapolis, I said to them how tickled I was and gratified that I was to receive their endorsement. But I also said to them this: look, every one of us in our positions has to continue to improve. And policing across the country is different in different locations. Community policing, the use of social workers, less confrontational approaches to circumstances, enhanced training. All of these things are going on across the country in a way that I think we can employ here in St. Louis County. When I said that to them, that I expect them to experiment, to innovate, to change, to improve, there was great appreciation for the fact that I was challenging them to get better. There was no resistance. They welcomed the opportunity to get better. Now, I wasn't speaking to the command staff. I've never spoken to the command staff, so I can't speak to whether or not they agree or not. But with the rank and file, there was openness to improving across those lines. Look, I lived a better part of Boston. I saw a whole different relationship between the police there and the community, a relationship built on trust and communication and openness. And I think we can do that here in St. Louis County, especially if we have a county executive who has their trust and respect.
All right, thank you. Moving on to Dr. Sam Page.
Well, first and foremost, we need to recognize that systemic racism exists in our country and in our community and all of our institutions and even in law enforcement. And we need to move forward to address this and address it aggressively. And that's why I've asked for a top to bottom review of our county police department and all of their policies. And we'll be doing that. And I'm pleased to have 2 police chiefs with great credibility in community policing and use of force guidelines, both to be assigned to review our department. And I'm pleased to learn that that the police department has assigned Lieutenant Colonel Troy Doyle to be the interface with this review and the police department. We know that our police department in St. Louis County does a pretty good job, and they take care of us, but we know that we can do better. And I am excited to see what this review brings, and it'll be starting in a matter of days. And I hope to have this information back in 3 or 4 months, and we can move forward.
Thank you. Moving on to Jamie Tolliver.
Thank you. So again, as I've said, I believe that education and communication are a huge part. I think that part of why St. Louis has a police force that operates in the way that it does is that very much like every other police force in the entire United States, they're not trained long enough, nor are they educated for the history of what it is that they do. Their oath to protect and serve, I believe, goes only so far, and it is very much subject to their own purview and their own opinions as to what that means. I definitely would instill something of a civilian public review board. And also, I believe that their training should be something that is certified. All people that do life-saving sort of skills, they are asked to be recertified. I do believe that something of a psychological analysis should also be a part of the process, because if you are not empathetic or sympathetic to the cause of the people that you are serving, it becomes really, really hard for you to be empathetic or sympathetic to their cause when you are put in charge of either saving them or determining whether or not what it is that they are doing is either lawful or unlawful. Yes, there are things in police policy that are written that says that police are able to do things, but then you have things like the union where they get certain immunities, where they are able to do things and they are not challenged. They are not held accountable for the things that they are doing in these communities. The fact that what they consider justice is not equally administered everywhere. The fact that it is more that the lower socioeconomic communities, that the Black communities are more at risk of being victims of police over use of power and brutality, and it goes unaccounted for, that these sergeants, these officers, these chiefs even are not being held accountable, is a major problem. And I definitely believe that if we can start at the base with whom we are sending out to serve the people, we'll do better for all the citizens of St. Louis County.
Thank you very much. And now on to Jake Zimmerman.
What we need is accountability. What we need is reform. What we need is a police chief who will not insult the people of this region by denying that racism is a problem and by refusing to even meet with advocates on behalf of law enforcement officials of color. What we do not need is more playing footsie with the police union or with corporate dark money and special interests. And what we really do not need is to waste months on a study to tell us what we should already know. So the thing that differentiates me in this race is that I released a detailed plan for accountability and reform. You can find it on my website at jakezimmerman.org. You can look at the dozens of bullet points. I will not bore you with a multi-point plan here, other than to tell you that this is stuff we already know. This is stuff that leaders in this community have been calling for a long time. Just look at the Post-Dispatch news story about the outrage that goes by the name of the Muni Shuffle. And then look at my police reform plan where we were talking about this before the Post-Dispatch was. It is high time to confront our weaknesses and our challenges in the face. We don't need to hide behind civic progress. We don't need to hide behind corporate dark money. We don't need to hide behind the police union. We need to acknowledge we have a problem. We need to work to fix it now. And if we have leadership that isn't interested in fixing the problem, then that leadership needs to get out of the way.
All right. Thank you. Taking a question that came in from the question and answer box, somewhat related. What will be done to address the alarming rate of gun violence in St. Louis County? And we'll go back to Mr. Mantovani.
Well, so look, the fact is that gun violence is a national epidemic that is by no way intended to be an excuse. So are you guys getting back noise? Well, I'm just going to talk through it. Right? Raise your hand if you can't hear me. Here's the deal. There have been programs that have been initiated in other communities across the country that have been very effective with respect to avoiding and reducing gun violence and violent crime generally. We are not the only community that has had these issues. We're not the only community that has the issues now. We ought to be able to learn from some of these other programs. My favorite happens to be Operation Ceasefire, which was a program that was initiated in Boston in the early part of the 2000s, which was a public-private partnership comprised of clergy, police, prosecutors, and business interests who were committed to A, getting the most violent criminals off the street, and B, providing them an alternative relative to social services, jobs, housing, educational opportunities, and the like, if they chose to reduce their violent propensities. Operation Ceasefire was a very effective program at reducing gun violence in Boston. Boston's 2.5 times the size of St. Louis and has about 1/3 of the homicides every year. So there are real programs out there, and I look forward to initiating those as aggressively and quickly after election as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Page.
Well, first, I would recognize that I called for and signed into law legislation in St. Louis County that would prevent domestic abusers from carrying concealed weapon. And they would have to turn those weapons, concealed weapon permit in when they receive the order of protection from the court. We work very closely with Moms Demand Action on advocacy, and this was a priority that that group advocated for, and I was proud to work with them. It's important, again, that we engage our community leaders, our civic leaders, our clergy, to make sure that we have the trust in the community to have these tough conversations about guns and violence and getting the guns away from our kids. That takes intervention, that takes relationships, and that's what I hope to continue to do as county executive.
And Ms. Tolliver, please.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Okay, so I definitely believe that, again, here's one of those situations where education and communication are very vital to the ideas of making sure that the guns, when they're on the street, that there's an accountability for everyone who is a gun holder. I understand that the Second Amendment right is very powerful to a lot of people, and they like to use that, but they're using these ideas of rights as the same reason that they're not wearing masks. And I think that we need to make it so that people understand what they are doing. I am actually a member of Moms Demand Action, so I sat through many a meeting where they are discussing the damages that these things are doing when things that like the NRA and these gun laws are passed in such a way where they are irresponsibly putting guns in hands of people who are not deserving or have not been properly vetted. So I definitely think that there needs to be a process by which obtaining a gun and maintaining a gun make it so that those who hold guns are accountable. Those who have done things unlawfully with guns are no longer able to have them. And when you talk about gun violence in communities, a lot of things in African American communities, a lot of those things have more to do with the lack of proper housing, proper food, proper education, proper health care, and those people that are engaging in these unhealthy activities and these hurtful and these things that are degrading a community have more to do with the fact that they feel as though they are left with little to no options. So I definitely believe that we actually need to uplift these communities if we expect them to be better.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Zimmerman.
Earlier in my public service career, I spent several years in Jefferson City. I have seen the thrall that the NRA holds over the other side and over those Democrats who chose to play footsie with the other side and chose to dodge and weave on this issue rather than stand up for justice. And my question to everyone listening here is, when are we going to say enough? When are we going to say that not even one more child murdered by senseless gun violence in this community, or indeed any other, is okay? When are we going to say that the time for relationship building and the time for playing nice with the Republican leadership in this state is over? The Republican leadership in this state is so enthralled to the NRA that what they want is guns in the schools and guns in our churches and synagogues and mosques. As a community, it is time for us to say, you don't share our values. This is not a time for relationship building. This is a time to stand up, and if necessary, it's a time for civil disobedience. Enough is enough. We're going to change this. The forces of justice are on our side, but we're only going to change this by standing together and by saying, not here, not on our watch, not within the strengths of our law enforcement community. We are going to take the guns out of the streets. We're going to take them out of the places they shouldn't belong. And if that requires standing up to people like Mike Parson rather than playing nice with him until we can get him replaced with Nicole Galloway, which is what needs to happen, then so be it.
All right. Again, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to a question that was previously submitted, and this has to do without a city-county merger. How do you propose greater cooperation and efficiency for the metro area? Again, we're answering all questions in alphabetical order. So, Mr. Mantovani. Mr. Mantovani, I believe you're still on mute. Here.
Well, you've turned me on mute. I'm sorry. Am I off now? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you.
Okay. All right. With respect to collaboration with the city of St. Louis, there are a number of ways we can do this, not involving a merger. First of all, we can work more closely together on a departmental basis. We've seen, I think, some efforts at that. I don't know how successful really one thinks they are with respect to the health departments of the city and the county around the COVID situation, but there certainly could have been additional collaboration, so we can do this on a departmental basis. Secondly, we have to build stronger relationships between the county executive and the mayor. And thirdly, we've got to convince all of the people in this community that in many respects, this is just one place. To most of the world, this is just St. Louis, man, and we have to come together as a region in order to solve our problems. Trying to take these sort of parochial solutions, a solution in the county, but not having any impact on the city, I think is sort of a fool's game. If we're gonna eliminate guns in St. Louis County, well, that's terrific. But I promise you that would have about zero impact so long as the city has no similar provision. As a practical matter, we have to collaborate more effectively. The other thing I'd like to say on this is we have to learn to collaborate more with the municipalities in St. Louis County. In my opinion, the county executive's office ought to have good, effective working relationships with all of the mayors and the municipalities across the region. The county executive doesn't have a great perspective about what's going on in Eureka or Pagedale or Cool Valley. I just know it, right? And without having good relationships with the metro mayors, the municipal mayors, it's very difficult to affect any type of regional collaboration. So there are a number of ways to do that. We can deal with structural things as well, but we don't need to engage in a merger at this time. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Page.
So I think there are a couple of issues, certainly cross-jurisdictional relationships with the surrounding counties, Jeffco, Franklin County, St. Charles County, and the city of St. Louis, and the problems we can address together. And we've certainly done that with our response to COVID-19. Unprecedented cooperation between the public health departments for testing and contact tracing, for the humanitarian relief, for the public health response, for the emergency response. And we continue with those daily communications. I talk to the county leaders of the other jurisdictions at least once a week or every 2 weeks. And I know our health departments are speaking daily in a very coordinated effort. The second piece is a relationship with the other political jurisdictions within St. Louis County. And I have those relationships. I've been endorsed by the firefighters. I talk to them frequently about their especially their emergency response during this pandemic. We work very closely with them to make sure that they were taken care of and they were able to take care of us. And then also the mayors. I've met with all of the mayors of all the municipalities at least once, some of them many times. Many of them said they'd never seen the county executive's office before. And we work very closely to develop those relationships, maintain those relationships. And yeah, we don't agree on everything, but we talk it through. We work on the things we agree on. We're civil when we don't agree, and we have a very good working relationship.
Thank you. Moving on, Ms. Tolliver.
Thank you. So as I said in my opening, I do not think that a merger is the best thing at this time. I absolutely do believe that communication with the city and the county, a unified front would absolutely be warranted, because as has been stated, we're St. Louis to everyone else but us. And I definitely believe that it looks very much like segregation when you think, oh, well, that's the city or that's the county. It does not matter, because the violence or the lack of health care or the lack of economical growth, all of that spreads. It spreads like wildfire from one city to one county to one municipality to one incorporated or unincorporated portion of St. Louis County. I definitely think that by communicating with them, if in the event that a merger were to happen, be it 5, 10, or 15 years from now, things would not be foreign. I think it would allow for almost a seamless transfer between the possibilities, of finding different roles and different portions of leadership between the county and the city, simply because we're already working together. I definitely think that there are things that should be done that will make it so that it is easier, so that we can also benefit from what they're doing well that we might be lacking, or what we're doing well that they're lacking in, so that it becomes a very symbiotic relationship between all of St. Louis. And like I said, together we win is more than a campaign slogan. It's absolutely a call to action. And I think that this is one of those situations where we are better together. Thank you.
And thank you. And finally, Mr. Zimmerman.
I think it is worth reflecting for a moment on why it is that the infamous Better Together proposal failed. The conventional wisdom is that it failed because they sought to make Steve Stenger the emperor of our region, and Steve Stenger was a criminal who belonged in federal prison. That answer is too cute by half. There is a deeper reason why Better Together failed, and the reason is that it was cynical from the start, and it was born of the way that too many quote-unquote reform attempts have afflicted this region over the years, which is a bunch of rich white guys and some Republican political consultants got together in a room and said, all right, we know what's best for the community, so we'll put together our plan without public input, and then we'll pay those Republican political consultants a bunch of money, and we'll make sure to get some money from our buddies at Civic Progress and our buddies in the other back rooms, and then we'll try and shove it down the people's throats. That is the antithesis of democracy. That is not how real reform happens, and that is precisely why it failed. Beyond the central mistake of entrusting any authority whatsoever to Steve Stenger, the fact is that reform must come from the grassroots, not be pushed on the people through AstroTurf. And so there is a lesson here, broader than regionalism. The lesson has implications for fixing the challenges in our police department, for fixing the challenges of unequal justice in the municipal courts throughout this community. It has broad lessons, but the core lesson is this: real reform takes work. It doesn't take cute slogans. It doesn't take a bunch of fat cats sitting around in a back room. And it doesn't take the kind of shenanigans that we've seen too much of from status quo politics in St. Louis County. If we want real reform, it's time for leaders who are willing to check their egos at the door. And it's time for leaders who are willing to work with the community to figure out how we make things better.
Sorry, I had a little technical issue there. I'm back now. I've received a request to start the questions rotating through the candidates in alphabetical order to allow equal preparation time. So after this next question, I will be starting the questions in going through the alphabetical listing so everybody gets a chance to be first, as well as respond as the final responder to the particular question. The next question is, what are your thoughts about the privatization of Lambert Airport? And so, Mr. Mantovani, this will be your last time kicking off the questions for the next 3 rounds.
It's important for everybody to understand. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. It's important to understand what all of the proposals that I have seen really involve along those lines. First of all, they do not involve generally the sale of the airport. They involve the signing of a long-term lease with an operator. A lease, as a practical matter, allows one to control the terms that the tenant has during the term of their operation. I think the average guy walking around the streets of St. Louis believes that when we talk about privatization of the airport, we're talking about a de facto sale of the airport, which is not the case. So far as I'm concerned as county executive, this is a city asset, but it is imperative that the county be represented with respect to how these discussions move forward. This is a regional asset. It's owned by the city. I make no claim relative to any of the proceeds of any transaction or such thing, but it's very important that the county be a party to whatever kinds of discussions might go on along those lines. It appears to me that there is going to be a vote in the city about how to proceed. I will leave it to the city voters to make that determination. I have some concerns about the nature of the process with respect to the way this privatization issue has come back up at this point in time. But again, I'll leave it to the voters in the city. The only thing that I will promise the voters in the county is that if this negotiation proceeds, and if I'm St. Louis County executive, I will be at the table whenever this matter is negotiated and discussed to make sure that it works for the long-term best interest of the region.
And Mr. Page?
Thank you. The long-term lease of the Lambert Airport will be up to the city voters, City of St. Louis voters, and they'll have a chance to have their voice heard in November. If they choose to enter into a long-term lease, or perhaps better to say, enter into a conversation about a long-term lease, then St. Louis County will definitely be a part of that conversation. The Lambert Airport is in St. Louis County. The land around it is in St. Louis County. There are municipalities that have zoning restrictions over that land, and St. Louis County will certainly be part of the conversation should any incentives be considered. But really, the long-term lease of the municipal airport isn't just about making terminals better. It's about economic development around the airport. And St. Louis County will be very active in that conversation. We'll make sure that the interests of St. Louis County residents are represented.
And Ms. Tolliver?
Thank you. So I too believe that the merger, or not, excuse me, not the merger, the privatization of the airport is something that actually does speak to the economics of the St. Louis County area as a whole, because it's something that's not just simply used by St. Louis County. I do believe that the county government should absolutely have a seat at the table for all discussions as it relates to the improvements or the leases or the loans or selling of any such property. I definitely think that it is wonderful that it's something that's being left up as a vote to the citizens, because I definitely think that oftentimes we allow those in power to make all of the major decisions that affect everyone in ways that it could definitely be to their adversity. So I think that by privatizing it or remaining public, I think that absolutely should be a decision of those who stand to benefit or be in disparity as a result of it.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Zimmerman, please.
Did anybody else notice the striking similarity of the tap dancing in all the answers you just heard? Is no one going to call it what it is? Is no one going to talk about what the most recent proposal that was actually put before the people of the city of St. Louis was? It went like this. Republican political consultant, top major domo for the biggest Republican donor in the state, sees an opportunity to make some money off of the deal. Republican consultant pitches a deal to the city of St. Louis where I'll give you consulting services about airport privatization for free. The only catch is that I get paid if the airport's privatized. But don't worry, I'll be totally neutral. Don't worry, I'll put a proposal before the voters that'll be completely fair. But by the way, I get paid millions of dollars if the airport is privatized. If you read the news coverage, if you read what Tony Messenger wrote about what was going on there, surely you could see, A, that this is not how democracy is supposed to work, and B, that it has all sorts of shades of what we went through with Better Together, and perhaps it's not an accident that some of the same political consultants and some of the same big Republican money might have been involved there. So forgive me if I express a certain degree of healthy skepticism when out of nowhere this proposal is resurrected. So here's the deal. We don't know what the proposal is. We don't know what is proposed to put before the voters of the city of St. Louis. But I'll say this, if it's anything like the stink that emanated from the process the last time around, then all concerned citizens of this region should be highly concerned, and you should be really concerned if there is any leader in St. Louis City or St. Louis County who might be more interested in tap dancing with some of the big money behind it than casting a very serious eye on the actual nature of the proposal itself.
All right. And this is a little bit of a follow-up question to that. The question has come in. As county residents, do we have any influence over the proposed privatization of Lambert Airport? And if yes, what is it that we should be doing to express our views and concerns? And so this time we're rotating through, so I will start with Mr. Page.
Well, we certainly have influence over what happens at St. Louis Lambert Airport. First of all, our health department has jurisdiction. We do all the health inspections for the restaurants there. Any zoning issues and the Lambert footprint will go through St. Louis County or the surrounding municipalities. And any redevelopment incentive, St. Louis County will be very much a part of that conversation. And we will assert our ability to be at the table. We also have to recognize that the users of the airport are really paying for the airport through landing fees. And when we fly out of the airport or we fly into the airport, then that's those fees are added to our tickets, and we're paying for that. So St. Louis County residents and residents from the region are paying to operate the airport, and we are paying for it. We do have a say in it, and we should very much be at the table as we're talking about what's the best kind of airport we should have, and how would it work for our region to help us grow, create jobs, and make our economy stronger and better.
Thank you. Moving on, Ms. Tolliver.
Thank you. So I believe that it is my understanding that the county residents, as people, as taxpayers, they will have a somewhat of a say so in how their tax dollars are allocated. And so where they are spent with regards to the airport, they will also have a say so, very much like they have somewhat of a say so, whether it is something that is upheld or not upheld. If they have a say so in things like their homeowners association fees, or their ability to have a say so in how things are economically dispersed. So I think that they absolutely will and should have a say. I definitely think that it's one of those things that as leadership, we should take a greater stance in making sure that they are very well informed of where exactly their dollars are being spent and dispersed, so they can make a reasonable decision when they do go to a voting poll, to say whether or not they are for things such as privatization, or if they are going to talk about whether or not they should sell portions of that area. So I definitely think that if they do not have a say so, I would definitely say that it's one of the things that they should be given privileged information to.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
The airport is a regional asset. The airport sits on land in St. Louis County. The airport is not a honeypot. The airport is not a trove of political goodies. The airport is not a bag of favors for political consultants to be divvied up at will. The airport belongs to all of us. And what we need leadership that is going to stand up to make sure that regional assets are not squandered. We have seen quite enough of that, particularly under the prior administration in St. Louis County. We have seen what happens in St. Louis County when regional assets are handed out to campaign contributors and to the privileged few. Look, I've been your county assessor for years now. I have a little bit of a record here. I have a little bit of a record of getting my dander up when people with big bank accounts and lawyers in Gucci suits think that they can take advantage of the public trust and think they can get away with the fast one. And my attitude is, if someone tries to give a sweet deal on the airport for the benefit of some political consultants or a private developer or anybody else, it's no different than the fake farmers that I fought against. It's no different than the folks who tried to hide their private airplanes that I fought against. It's no different than the fake charities pretending to be churches and nonprofits when they were really ritzy senior living centers. You know, there's a million different stories, but they're all the same story, which is the privileged few in this town from time to time thinking they can try and pull a fast one on everybody else. What you should expect, what you should demand out of all of your leaders, including your county executive, is someone who has the guts to speak truth to power when truth needs to be spoken.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Mantovani.
I think that's exactly right. I think everyone has to recognize that St. Louis County is the economic engine for the region. The GDP of St. Louis County is approximately 3 times the GDP of the city of St. Louis. There's no reasonable way that any of this ought to happen without St. Louis County and the St. Louis County executive asserting him or herself with respect to what is an appropriate arrangement and what is not. This is a regional asset, that is true. The city does have primary ownership rights, that is true. To suggest that the county can dictate this, I think is misleading. I think it's also, frankly, disingenuous to suggest that every time somebody makes $1 on a deal, it's a bad deal. The focus here ought to be how this airport serves the region, how it positions St. Louis to grow in the future. That's much more important to me, frankly, than whether a given individual thinks somebody's overpaid or underpaid on a consulting contract. I do not mean to suggest that that's irrelevant, but as a practical matter, it's the asset that matters here. It's to our community that matters here. With respect to consultants, they're a dime a dozen. That's not the focal point. People who get all bent out of shape about a consultant here or a consultant there and lose their perspective on what's for the benefit of the region, make bad decisions every day.
Thank you very much. This next question comes from one that was submitted in earlier, and we will start with Ms. Tolliver. What are your goals for the county over the next 4 years? And what do you see as long-term goals for growth?
So I definitely think that there are several areas, with social justice, health, and education being number one right now, especially where we are right now as we're facing the systemic racism and the COVID crisis. So I see there being a major surge in communication between leadership in all the cities and counties of the county and the municipalities in such ways where we are working in ways where there are that the needs of these particular areas are being addressed personally, as opposed to leadership giving these areas the things that they think that they might need, because we don't all live in these other areas. We live where we live, and we've been where we've been. So you might not know the issues of Eureka. You might not know the things that are happening in the other areas. You might not know what's going on in Ferguson, because if those are not your home areas, you wouldn't know. So I definitely see a newer county organization where there is communication between the cities and the municipalities, such that everyone is feeling like their needs are being met. And over the 4-year period, I think that by going out and personally speaking to these people, not just on occasion, not just at press conferences, but literally reaching out to these mayors and to these aldermen and these councilmen in these areas that they are most concerned about, and addressing their needs directly and head on, I think that is definitely the way to go, so that we are more aware of those who share space with us. We're more aware of those who share the communities that we live in, those who travel in and out of the regions that we visit most often, because it's easy to say about what the areas that you live in, the areas that you grow in, and the people that you see every day, and to say that those people over there may not have what we have. And that's really easy to say, but it's better if you go and you understand why they don't have those things and what needs they need to have filled. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Zimmerman.
What this community, and specifically what St. Louis County needs, and needs urgently, is an end to the status quo good old boy politics that has afflicted it for years and really for decades now. What we need is an end to the culture of the backroom deals. What we need is an end to the political payoffs to the favored few. What we need is an end to the nonsense that gets us federal COVID money being spent on slush funds for political cronies rather than where it is urgently needed in the community. If we're to have economic development that works for this entire region rather than for the favored few, then after what Steve Stenger and the Aftermath did to the County Economic Development Partnership and the Port Authority and all those other tools, we got to look it in the eye, and we got to say that the status quo is unacceptable, that we can't just keep the same good old boys in power, that we can't just hand out a few favors here and take care of a few special interests there and pat them on the back and pretend that the same old ways of doing business is going to get us the change that we need. It is not an accident that one of this region's largest employers just announced that rather than putting thousands of new jobs at their headquarters in St. Louis, they're instead building a new second headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's what status quo leadership in St. Louis County has gotten us. That's what the betrayal of trust by Steve Stenger has gotten us. And what we've seen since then is empty words. What we haven't seen is reform, real accountability, and a commitment to tackle the problems so that we can actually have a path forward that the people can believe in.
All right. Mr. Mantovani, please.
My objectives for the community are to create more economic growth, to create opportunity for all. Absent the creation of economic growth, we're not going to reduce poverty significantly. We're not going to change food deserts significantly. We're not going to reduce the healthcare disparities significantly. Economic growth is lacking in this region in order to drive social change, in order to avoid the status quo. The fact is that I don't believe the absence of corruption is real leadership. The absence of corruption should be a given. Real leadership requires something more. And with respect to the status quo, I submit that there are only two people on this who are not part of the status quo, and that's Ms. Tolliver and myself. To suggest that people are avoiding the status quo when they've been in public office for 10 and 15 years belittles the rest of us. People like that have had their opportunity to create change, and they haven't done it. It is time to avoid the status quo, but it's time to avoid the status quo with people who haven't had 15 years of opportunity to do so.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Page.
Thank you. So the biggest challenge in our community, actually I was asked this by a reporter about a month ago, really is to address structural and systemic racism. It touches everything, every complex problem that's in front of us. It has impacted the COVID-19 in our community. We know that some communities have been much more impacted than others. It impacts all of our institutions. It raises questions of trust in law enforcement. So those, responding to the public health epidemic, addressing structural racism, public safety, those are the things that I'm going to work on in the next couple of years. Now, the COVID-19 response, that's going to be here. We're reading across the world, across the country today, that this continues to explode. We're in a good position here in St. Louis County because of the early decisions we made and the slow and thoughtful reopening and the cooperation, the regional cooperation of the public health response. That's going to continue. The economic recovery, it's very important. We've just received the highest bond rating from all three bonding agencies, and they specifically identified our response to COVID-19, the early stay-at-home orders, and the halt of all non-emergency spending early on that has left us in a good position moving forward with this recovery. A lot of challenges in our community, and I look forward to working on them.
All right. Thank you very much. We're getting close to 7:45, but since we're not quite there, I think we'll try and get one more question in before we move on to our closing statement. We've talked a lot about economics and COVID, and there's sort of a specific question here that says evictions are likely to ramp up as courts open. What do you see as the role of county executive in addressing an increase in evictions? What are your priorities in developing a plan to get us through this situation? And we'll start with Mr. Zimmerman.
I'll just start off by observing, as the guy whose name starts with Z, it's a special pleasure to go first. This feels like opposite day in kindergarten when I got to be the line leader. And it feels a little bit like the day I got to the legislature and realized I was serving with Clint Zweifel, and I wouldn't have to be last on the list all the time. Mike, I've been talking about this issue for months and trying to raise the alarm, and unfortunately at times it's felt like yelling at a brick wall. The fact is that the courts are starting up again, and when the courts start up, those landlord-tenant proceedings are happening. In some cases, it's the first thing on the docket. And this region has a rich history of tolerating bad landlords, and in particular bad out-of-state landlords, like the despicable conduct of a company called TEH Realty that was allowed to run wild in St. Louis County, that was allowed to have people living in substandard homes, in some cases without heat and air conditioning and running water, while still dunning their bank accounts and threatening to throw them out on the streets. The looming eviction crisis is real, and an eviction crisis is a public health crisis. Right now, if people are thrown out into the streets, and let's face it, where people will be thrown out onto the streets is in the parts of this community where this virus is hitting the hardest, right? So we will see more lives lost. And so I come back to what I said before. The county has belatedly realized that this is a problem, and our leadership, though late to the game, has finally agreed to spend some money on it. But it's a pittance compared to the $15 million that was spent on political slush funds. Every dollar that is spent on political slush funds is a dollar that doesn't go to help protect people from being thrown out of their homes. And it's time to raise our voices now before it's too late.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Mantovani, please.
Yeah, I don't know if there was an answer in there relative to what to do about the impending crisis, other than acknowledgement that there is a crisis. It seems to me that the county executive ought to be exercising leadership in communicating with landlords, in communicating with uh, uh, the county council around the kinds of behaviors that are appropriate in the face of an eviction crisis of this sort. I know from a personal standpoint of quite a number of landlords, as a practical matter, who engaged in voluntary forbearance, who allowed tenants to not pay rent, and who are not proceeding against them. Those that are, I think, are vulnerable to criticism, to inquiry, and I would hope that an enlightened bench would consider the circumstances before proceeding in the most restrictive ways possible.
Thank you. Mr. Page, please.
Well, in my first week in office, I was presented with a letter from the regional director of HUD to implement the Trump administration's policies of taking as much public housing offline as possible. And they needed my signature to demolish 200 public housing units in Wellston. And I said we wouldn't do that. And in fact, we were approached by a whistleblower who told us that those public housing units could be saved with a modest investment in rehabilitation. And we did that. And we now have 3 proposals to rehab 175 units in Wellston. And in addition, early on in the foreclosure conversation, when COVID-19 hit, I had a conversation with the presiding judge, and we developed a path forward to prevent foreclosures, at least have a moratorium on foreclosures in St. Louis County until we could get relief into the hands of those who needed it most. And our COVID-19 grant from the stimulus fund, the CARES Act, has set aside $10 million for rental support and mortgage assistance for low and middle income families. That process is ongoing, and we just a few days ago awarded nonprofits in our community the ability to determine eligibility and help individuals in our community with rent and mortgage assistance.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Tolliver, please.
Thank you. So I definitely think that communication between the landlords and the legal system is absolutely necessary. These residents who are going to be evicted, I think that making sure that there are absolute programs that are set in place, but they are not left to the street. Like, that should not be their option. There should be things set in place where they are given time frames, and they are given applications, they are given options. I think that if you can talk to judges, and you can look and make sure that these landlords are reputable, that their practices and the ways in which they are treating their tenants, if they are communities in which they are not absolutely providing the quality of life, that where the heat's not working, where the windows are not properly insulated. If these are things, to me, that they should be fined for those purposes, such that it's like, why would you put someone out? You're lucky that somebody is staying here at all. So I think that if the accountability that these landlords are held up to were higher, it would make it a lot harder for them to go into a court with a straight face and with a bold assertion that they're going to start removing people from these properties. I think that there should be systems set in place where the people who are right now facing this crisis of eviction, that there should be things that are set up with nonprofit organizations and other HUD situations where they do have a place where they can find refuge in the midst of this. Very much like anything else that we've done with this COVID crisis, that idea that there is relief for them to go. There are places for them to go, that we will not increase the homeless rate in St. Louis County simply because of the COVID crisis and the derogatory actions of landlord establishments.
Thank you. As we get ready for our closing statements, I want to thank all the candidates for joining us tonight and answering your questions. I want to thank everybody who has participated, for joining us tonight. And for people who have sent in questions, if I didn't get to your specific question, hopefully we got one on the same topic. We did receive quite a few questions tonight, and we do appreciate your active participation. So for our closing arguments, each candidate will have 2 minutes, and we're back to the top of the order. So we will start with Mr. Mantovani.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Ms. Jordan, Mr. Ferdman, League of Women Voters. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you here tonight. For too long, this community has tolerated a lack of aggressiveness on behalf of its leaders in confronting the fundamental challenges we face. St. Louis County is in a state of decline. Make no mistake about it. Its population is shrinking or stagnant at best. Its economic base and GDP lack those of other communities of comparable size and stature. Our homicide rate is surging. The educational outcomes from many of our schools are committing thousands every year to lives with limited potential. Our community is among the most segregated in America, with poverty rates high and great racial disparities. And despite all of these challenges, in my opinion, our leadership stands by, wringing its hands. In the words of an old musical comedy, it fiddles, it twiddles, and it resolves. We tread water while other communities across the Midwest swim merrily past us, stealing our talent and our youth, our opportunity and our future. So badly does our leadership tread water that we must be called to task by a business leader who uses implicit threats about his company's commitment and future to the region if things don't change. Look, I'm concerned enough about our community to offer my service to create a different future for the region. I propose also a different kind of leadership, one that demonstrates impatience in pursuit of progress and change. Politicians like to speak about how slow change must be, and while I'm not so naive to believe that change ever happens overnight, I also believe that if you don't demonstrate some impatience, change never happens at all. Leadership must communicate a vision and set objectives. If you believe that the status quo in St. Louis is adequate, I'm not your candidate. I'm not your guy. I challenge those here tonight and those who we will meet on down the road during this campaign to imagine a better St. Louis, one that is growing and thriving and creating real opportunities for all. Please join me in this endeavor. Thank you and good night.
And thank you. And now, Mr. Sam Page, please.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been an honor to serve as your county executive for the past 15 months. And during that time, I've led the county through 3 crises, cleaning up the mess of my predecessor, Steve Stinger, managing the COVID-19 pandemic and its public health, humanitarian, and economic impacts, and the civil rights crisis uncovered by the Black Lives Matter movement. I announced I'd be running for county executive in November. I was committed to running before COVID-19 and before the murder of George Floyd, and I've been even more committed to running now. With everything we've seen in our nation and our local politics over the past few years, it's been more than disappointing to see so much negative campaigning in this race. And that's not what I'm about. It's not what this campaign is about. And so you won't hear it from me. People's lives are at stake, and that's where I'm going to focus my attention. I believe my experience as a medical doctor and on-the-ground experience as county executive over the past year makes me uniquely qualified and suited to be county executive as we move forward. I know what the job takes, and I would be honored to have your vote in the August 4th Democratic primary. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tolliver, please.
Thank you. I hate the evening is coming to an end. So I definitely believe that we as a country, I mean, county aside, we as a country have dealt with politics looking, sounding, and acting the same way for far too long. The fact that many can talk politics, many can speak politics, many can play politics is great, it's well and dandy, but it's only great and dandy for a few. I think that I am one of the few people that has ever run for any sort of political office that looks like change, that sounds like change, that acts like change, that comes from a place where change is needed, that is on the ground. I have been in nursing, I have been in education, I have been in customer service, I have been in probably every industry that there is. So I know these things. Whether you believe that I have the years of experience. Yes, I'm one of the younger people here, but if you are looking at those who are starting these protests, if you're looking at the ones who are starting movements, the ones who have started movements in history, they were not old people. These come from these young minds. They come from places where people know that you weren't listening to me before, but look what I can do now, sort of places. There are definitely things that need to be done. There are things that need to be done correctly. There are things that need to be done now. There are things that need to be done such that they are affecting those who feel as they do not have a voice. They feel as though they have not been heard. They have not been offered a seat at the table. So I ask that when you vote on August 4th, that you vote for change, that you vote for progress, that you vote for someone who has their ear to the street, that is willing to work with and to communicate and educate all those who are seeking to have a St. Louis County that represents progress and that does not look like how it has looked in years and years and years past. Thank you, and have a very great evening.
Thank you. And Mr. Zimmerman will get the last closing argument here.
Back to last yet again. This evening has been incredibly useful, and I think the reason it's been useful is because it's been instructive. And I think particularly for those of you who maybe haven't paid much attention to the race thus far, I think now you can see that there's a real choice here. That the candidates aren't the same. That what we are committed to and what we are about is profoundly different. You've heard me say some sharp and some blunt words this evening, and I recall to mind Harry Truman, our favorite son here in Missouri, when they called him, give him hell, Harry. And he smiled and he said, I don't give them hell, I just tell the truth, and they think it's hell. But look, I'm looking at a Zoom full of 90-odd proud, committed Democrats. And I need you. The big corporate and big Republican money has flowed in this race. Tens of thousands of dollars at a time to one of my opponents, hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time to another of my opponents. You can decide for yourself, thinking back on the answers you heard this evening, what the folks giving those $25,000 checks and those $250,000 checks thought they were going to get in return for them. But I have something better than that. What I have is you. What I have is real Democrats. What I have is people who are committed to the progressive cause. What I have is people who understand that real change is hard, that real change comes from the grassroots, that real change isn't about slogans, but it's about looking our problems in the eye. If that's what you're about, then I'm Jake Zimmerman, and I need your support and I need your help. I don't just want your vote. I want you to tell your friends and your family and every Democrat you know that this is not just a may the best person win situation. There is a real choice, and that the real Democrat, the real progressive, the person who shares your values is Jake Zimmerman. Thank you.
Thank you. And a big thank you to all the candidates for their insights in answering our questions tonight. If you have questions that we did not get to, I encourage all of you to reach out to the candidates and ask them directly. And ask if all of you have questions or need information about the Chesterfield Township Democrats, please follow us on Facebook, or you can go to our website for information about future meetings and events that we will be putting on. So again, thank you to all for joining us tonight, and be safe out there.